Hi, I'm Tyra G, your host of Frankly Speaking with Tyra G. Welcome again to our virtual global gathering of phenomenal women and those who love them. You, mothers, daughters, great and grandmothers, fearsome and generous, humble and honest in pursuit of new possibilities and purpose. You know we dig deep here and we come up strong. For those of you joining us for the first time, each month we explore a new theme inspired by you. Bravely we walk into places where tradition has taught us there's some things we just don't talk about, but not at this table. And no matter how hard judgment knocks, it will not get in. Beloved, here we live beyond the wreckage. Every week we educate, encourage, and empower each other. We share aha moments and stories that have been left in our pockets for too long. Every week we start right where we are. The first segment of our show is uniquely called The Beginning, where I invite you in and set the table. The middle is the main course, where one of you, yes you, and other experts join me in the interview seat. I named the last segment The Ending But Not Empty, because it's where I fill a virtual doggy bag with words of thoughts of empowerment and encouragement for you to take with. You're listening to Radio Fairfax, Virginia, on your TV, computer, or mobile device. And we are webcast worldwide on the internet at www.radiofairfax.org every Saturday evening at 8 p.m. Should you miss us, no worries. You can catch up on our podcast. We're on YouTube, Frankly Speaking with Tyra G. And if you feel like reaching out and connecting with me offline, I would love it. And it's easy. Just email me at tyra@tyragarlington.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Courtney Nero, for composing and performing our Frankly Speaking theme song and for naming it I'm Listening. I am so excited about our shows this month. We are exploring a topic you selected at the beginning when we did our first survey. It's exciting, timely, and crosses generations and cultures. This week, the table is set for us to look at our health sustainability as a result of trauma. Yeah, we live in a space of trauma sometimes. Women's health is dynamic and diverse and codependent on so many levels, to include physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, and financial. Trauma can impact all of these. You know, I like to start the show by creating a common thought space for us while we're together. So let me introduce you to Darlene. Darlene is a young woman in her early 20s who has never married and has 3 young children, though the children are currently in foster care. She's employed at McDonald's in a suburban shopping area. She rents a small apartment and takes care of her basic needs. Darlene dropped out of high school during her junior year and has not obtained her GED. She had one sibling, an older brother, who was murdered while in his teens. And since he was older, that means Darlene was younger, in her teens. Darlene reports using alcohol, marijuana, and crack cocaine in the recent past. She states she was physically, emotionally, and sexually abused as a child and spent most of her life in foster care. She was emancipated at age 16. That means she was on her own. The murder of her brother was a very traumatic event for her, and she states that she feels powerless and hopeless with regard to getting the children returned to her care. Darlene reports that she has continual thoughts about suicide. She has very few friends and no support in the community. Now, based on what I've told you, would you suspect that Darlene has had or is experiencing trauma? Well, Tyra, what is trauma anyway? Let's go deeper. According to Psychology Today, traumatic events include, listen up now, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, terrorism and war, domestic violence, witnessing, this is important, witnessing violence against others, and accidents and natural disasters. They can all result in serious stress and detrimental consequences for survivors and their family. Now, think back to Darlene. Her brother was murdered in his teens. She's lost her children. She was physically, sexually, and emotionally abused. Is Darlene a candidate for trauma? Is she living trauma? Psychology Today tells us almost 50% of all individuals will be exposed to at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. So, ladies, if you have experienced trauma, hear me now. You are not alone. Although the majority of individuals will be able to manage the trauma over time, many survivors will experience long-lasting problems. Approximately 8% of survivors will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And we hear that a lot when we're talking about the military, but now we're hearing it as it relates to natural disasters, and now since we've taken the cover off of abuse that exists through domestic violence, we're seeing some of those results as well. Many survivors currently living with PTSD experience symptoms that are both chronic and severe. These include nightmares, insomnia, difficulty with intimate relationships. And I've read several comments about soldiers coming back from war, men and women, who really cannot sustain a marital relationship. Fear, anxiety, anger, shame, aggression, suicidal behavior, loss of trust. That's major. Remember that. Loss of trust and isolation. Additional psychological disorders may occur as well, to include depression, anxiety, alcohol, and substance abuse. Now, we've heard that an extreme event may be sufficient to produce PTSD in all of us without any of us being vulnerable. Think back to 9/11. Many of us still suffer thinking about that day, seeing the images, and it's still a very real part of our conversation. But even less extreme events can produce PTSD in those who are already vulnerable. Think back to Darlene. She's alone. She's isolated. She's undereducated. She's without her children. She thinks of suicide. Is she vulnerable? I want you to hold your thoughts and answers until the end of today's show. My guest and I will talk up close and personal about trauma and our personal surviving journeys. We're going to share and talk about our own vulnerability and how we have come to separate what happens to us from who we are. And if you don't hear anything else today, hear this. You are not what has happened to you. You are created specially, and you are a designer's original. So the ability to separate yourself from your circumstances is critical to your sustainability. Please don't forget that. I'm going to, without further ado, introduce you to my guest today. And the first thing you will hear, not her name, but her reading of a beautiful piece called Global Diaspora. It was not written from her head, but from her heart and from her spirit.
I am the voice of diaspora. I am the voice of diaspora, the one and the many, who live in two worlds, pulled by the memories and attachments of their places of origin, resurrected from the dead by an assimilated life in the present, pursuing their dreams in a new place of migration. I am the voice of a lost generation whose youth galvanized their will to break free from tradition, so they ran from their history and denounced their ancestors. I am the voice of the untold numbers who are unaccounted, with whom I have an eternal bond, and for whom my loyalty triggers emotions of guilt and a sense of duty. I am woman whose traditions in my native land drove me to flee to new frontier regions where I could explore my possibilities and find a self unchained by gender. I am the voice of hundreds and thousands whose lives are torn by civil wars, ruthless dictatorships, forces of circumstance and calamity, abject poverty and oppression. I am the voice of the countless who survived torture an unspeakable terror in the hands of their native brothers and sisters. I am but only one of the many who survived the adversity of renegade governments, militant political factions, zealots and fanatics, mercenaries and opportunists who squelched human rights and caused communities to flee by night through borders across deserts and high seas to become refugees in foreign lands. I am the survivor who journeyed for decades with guilt and self-recrimination only because I lived. I journeyed with self-loathing in my newfound home in a foreign land to realize myself and to find a small niche where I could build a life. I struggled to break free from social isolation and mental torment, and from being voiceless and helpless in a society where I am marginalized and invisible. I condemned myself for having chosen my own life because I willed my own destiny and chose personal fulfillment, forsaking tradition and old habits. I forged a new path, separating myself from my ancestors who died to defend my motherland and to preserve the beliefs that make me stand strong, tall, and resolute today. For that, I punished myself with endless self-loathing and sabotaged every effort at having an iota of happiness. I am the voice of that child who never had a chance at the tender age of 2 or 3, tangled by starvation and tripped by the giants Kwashiorkor and Marasmus. I am the one who is the means of collecting money for aid agencies on whose behalf they plead, and you see me on your television screen, skinny legs and distended stomach, whose eyes are the feast of dragonflies, and whose wail is not heard across the Atlantic. I am the voice of the one whose father fled to make a life in another land, or whose mother became a young indentured servant, forced into prostitution among strangers, where she speaks not the language nor understands their culture. I am the voice of thousands from Afghanistan, Albania, Armenia, Burundi, Bosnia, Chile, Congo, Croatia, Cuba, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Haiti, Kampuchea, Kosovo, Liberia, Mongolia, Nigeria, North Korea, Palestine, Rwanda, Romania, Senegal, Sri Lanka, Syria, Uganda, Vietnam, and many more places I could neither spell nor pronounce, who left behind their dead siblings unburied or dead parents unmourned. I am the one who moved forward determined to make a life so that one day I could become one with the eternal voice. I am the voice from beyond the material realm, the spirit that has risen from the dead, who has revived and grasped the sweet honey of life and is now an embodiment of living in grace. I am the voice of hundreds and thousands of immigrants, illegal and unprotected by law, who are abused by employers, wrenching in their sleep, alone and confused, with depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, living in mental isolation and helplessness. I am the voice of the guilty and the shamed, humiliated and terrorized, children of the great diaspora, who negate themselves in the hopes of passing their children for first-class citizens in a new country where they migrated. They come and go, labor and toil, bearing the brunt of bigotry, racism, prejudice, and discrimination in a world that has increasingly become more materialistic, more unjust, and more blatant in its obliteration of human rights. I am the voice of spirit abiding in every home, with each individual whose worries at night and by day entail how families have been torn asunder like the peas from a pod, blown by the great wind across the fields. I am the voice of the Spirit, the one who desires all children of the universe to heal, all people to love one another and live in peace, to prosper in harmony and rise to their manifest destiny.
Wow. Heart to heart, spirit to spirit. We'll hear more from the diaspora.
I want a world of peace and justice, and a human community elevated to the highest level of divinity.
You have heard the voice of Hanna. Now, Hanna, say your name. Together, let's say it.
Kebbede.
Kebbede. You know, I love this woman. And we've actually practiced her name on several occasions. And I can't apologize. All I can do is just love and smile. But
Thank
what
you,
I want to
Tyra.
do is, I want you to walk into the piece you just read. I want to know what motivated you. I kept listening and I'm going, she's every woman. She's every child. She's every victim. She's every survivor. What made you write that? How did you get to that place? Would you share that with us?
Sure. It was back in 1987 when I wrote this. And that was one of the most difficult periods of my life after I had left Ethiopia, which is where I'm from originally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn at the time. I had rented my apartment in Manhattan to subsidize my rent in Brooklyn because I didn't want to work anymore.
Okay.
I needed time out.
Okay.
I needed mental health time out.
Okay.
And it was during that period when any news that I read in the newspapers, anything that I saw on television, any suffering, any pain was very personal to me. It was something that I felt as if it were happening to me personally. So I would be up all night just crying, praying, asking God to help me, to use me so that I can make a difference, to change these circumstances, these traumas that I was witnessing. And the reason I think I was so sensitive to it myself was because I had left Ethiopia extremely traumatized. My father had been executed
Oh, my.
by a military squad. My mother was in prison for a couple of years because she had demanded habeas corpus when he was in prison because he was being held without charges, not him, but also other people.
Mm-hmm.
So she led a group of women and marched right up and said, let our men go or charge them with something. And a week later, they took her in. And several things had happened to me during that time.
How old? What season?
It was after I graduated from college. I wasn't
Okay.
I wasn't a small child. I was in my early 20s.
So you were still
But I was-
evolving emotionally
yes.
and raw.
Yes.
And these were your parents, so you had separation anxiety, and you're looking at it.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, and there was no closure. I mean, when my dad went, I was working in the countryside at the time. I had graduated with a degree in sociology, and I was working in a rural development project as a researcher. So I only came on weekends, and one weekend I come and I'm told he's in prison. Then I go try to visit him at prison. Then a couple of weeks later, I come back and he has been moved and we can't see him anymore. And so things kind of progressed from bad to worse. And one weekend I come and he was dead. He was killed, you know. And but if I may share with you something really profoundly supernatural happened to me. He died on a Saturday. On a Thursday night, I'm at work in the rural countryside. It's called Asella. And I'm in my home listening to the radio. And suddenly there was a realization that came over me that I was never going to see him again. It was a knowing. I just knew it. I didn't think it. It just came. And I cried. I sobbed for 4 hours alone in that place. But still, it's nothing prepares you to a sudden death. And you read about the various types of trauma. There are a few actually that I found on another website, and one of them is sudden death of a
Yes.
loved one.
Yes.
Yeah. So like Darlene, who lost her brother to a crime, that would be definitely a very serious trauma, apart from the fact of losing him, that it was a sudden death.
Yes.
So anyway, bringing you back to my apartment in Brooklyn, I was just inspired to write this piece. I just, sometimes when I felt extremely depressed or overwhelmed with my emotions, I did one of two things. When I could find words, I wrote. When I couldn't find words, I drew. So this was the time I found words to write. I never stop when I write. I just write. It comes from the spirit, as you said. And so this is called I Am the Voice of Diaspora, and it was from the beginning. From the time I put ink to paper, I knew it was God's voice. This is not my voice.
Absolutely. And I've heard several things I want to repeat. Sudden death escalates and articulates in a way that we just can't manage, because and separation anxiety mixed in that. And the fact that I had a sneaking suspicion when we talked before, you and your dad were very close.
Very, yeah.
It took me years to, I'm still Daddy's little girl. And my father's been dead for 40 years. And I talk to him. I get that. And I suspect a lot of people listening get that. But now I also heard you slip in some things. You said I write or I draw. Now there's some artist in you as well. You want to talk about that a little bit? How that helped you through?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a story behind that as well. When I was a little girl, I used to draw all the time. I'm a middle child, and there are many years of space between my brother and myself and my sister and myself. So I was kind of a loner as a middle child, and so I spent a lot of time doing things by myself, and one of them was drawing and coloring. And then in college, I used to do posters and give them away to friends and stuff. But then during those years when I was in Ethiopia working, and it was during the socialist revolution when things were really, really difficult in one's life, I completely forgot that I even drew. I completely forgot about it.
Wow.
And then I came back to go to graduate school. I ended up in New York City, and one evening I was at a dinner party. I did not know the hosts. But a friend of mine had invited me, and we were at the dinner party. And one of the hosts suddenly said, I have a message for you. He said, did you used to draw? Draw again. Wow. And it's at that point that I remembered, oh, yeah, I used to draw. And it became one of the things that really, really helped me in the recovery from my PTSD, so to speak, from my trauma. Because by drawing, I could put words to my emotions when I couldn't name it.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah, sometimes you can't name how you feel.
And I don't know how many other people have experienced this, but sometimes I just groan. The pain is so incredible.
Yep.
And yes, go ahead. I don't mean to
that.
interrupt you.
No. So yes, I draw, and then of course when I went back to my drawing, then I joined the Art Student League in New York City. For 3 years, I drew there. I studied form, and then from there I branched out to doing collage and painting. So I do a lot of artwork. It saves my life.
And when you say that, we've talked about trauma a bit. We talked about all the things that can be impacted by trauma. We've talked about how it presents. And I personally think there are a lot of people that may go through life with a mask on, in denial that they've had, and maybe don't even remember they've had a very traumatic experience that they haven't managed. And so they live this silent life. You talk sometimes about the family within you, the family of you within you, and I always think there's a piece of unrecognized pain that we carry, and that's not good or bad. It just keeps us from being the best person we can be. And you have done, and I really, actually, I need to take a break. Can we take a break a minute?
Sure.
And oops.
Let's take a
be
break.
back in a minute. You can tell how emotionally involved I am with this topic and with my guest today. I'm not going to limit us. We're going to pursue this. If it means a second show, that's okay. Hanna, we left you in New York.
Yes.
And you have awakened the artist in you with the prompting of a message from somewhere.
Right.
Somewhere
exactly.
out there.
Somewhere out there.
Right. But there's something you have done to formalize the arts as a way of addressing trauma that you've given to this world. Will you talk a little bit about that stuff?
Yeah. Well, as I said, that kind of took me back to realizing that I did know how to draw, and I did draw. And I began to really use it. One thing I could say about my journey, I knew I was very disturbed inside. Disturbed as in I was constantly having flashbacks of some of the things that happened in Ethiopia. I had witnessed somebody getting machine gunned, for instance, so I would have flashbacks of that, things like that. And I was having sleepless nights. I was on hyper alert. I was 24/7 working because I couldn't rest. I couldn't really relax. The only time I rested was if I slept, when I fell asleep. So for all of those reasons, eventually I realized that I needed to really work through these emotional kind of hyperballs.
Okay.
And ended up going to therapy. And then in therapy, of course, now, I'm having to remember a lot of things, including my relationship with my father, the times when I was a brat to him.
Oh, I can't
which was
imagine.
a lot. So all through that period, whenever I couldn't access my emotion directly, drawing and art became a way for me to connect with myself.
Okay.
It became a way, and fast forward, when in 2015, when I decided I really have to do something with all this experience that I have, to be able to reach out to people who might feel isolated and alone, as I did once upon a time, when I was going through my anxiety and my depression. I was very, very much alone. I was with a lot of people. I had a lot of friends. I was, in social events and all that. But I was alone. I was alone inside. And I felt very isolated because I couldn't talk about my problem with people. I couldn't tell them how I felt. Nobody really wants to hear, that you're very depressed. A lot of people want to kind of quickly take you out of that place.
Yes.
So, and you need to be in that place for as long as you need to be there to understand why you're feeling the way you are.
I want you to say that again, because I think that it's a cousin of grief. And very often we say, girl, you need to get over it. Or haven't you cried? Don't cry about that. Let that go. No.
Right.
It's a process.
Yeah.
A process has steps. Steps take you backward, forward, up, and down. But moving through, this is the key word, on the other side of through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And this is the message we want people to understand. You don't have to be stuck between you're no longer and you're not yet. But you may have to remain there for a while.
You have to hold it.
Yes.
That's really the key.
Absolutely.
Because that's the only way you also get to, in psychotherapy, what they try to do is to help you hold all your different emotions at the same time, so that you don't get overwhelmed to the point where you leave yourself. Because that's what happens in trauma. There is fight, flight, and freeze. You either fight back, or you run away, or you freeze. If you're overwhelmed, as in a situation like mine, where I am watching somebody being machine gunned, I can't run away. I can't fight. So what did I do? I freeze. And that freezing translates into helplessness. You feel helpless. That helplessness makes you angry. It makes you sad. So there are a lot of people who walk around feeling numb. They say, I feel numb. I don't know why I feel numb. Or they feel like they're floating. It's because you have a lot of frozen emotions. You know, you're kind of stuck, like you said. So when you begin to look at your problems, you know, whatever you're feeling, whatever you feel is the source of your pain, if somebody comes along and says, get over it, it's the wrong thing to say, and you can't just get over it just like that. You need time to hold it in place. So you have to kind of go through the process of seeing it for what it is, then honoring your feelings. If it's anger, honor your anger. You don't have to go kill anybody. You don't have to seek revenge, but you can honor that you feel that way. A part of you feels that way. And like you mentioned earlier, we have the family, you know, this internal family system. We have many, many parts to us. When one part of us says, you know, I want that person dead. I mean, there are times when a part of me has felt like the person who killed my dad. It wasn't just one person, but the person who made that decision that he should be killed by a firing squad, as well as the people who pulled the trigger. There was a part of me that wanted to hate them, that wanted to see harm come to them. But then there was a part of me that would say, that's not going to bring your father back. That's not, you're not going to allow them to win by turning you into a person who's going to be a hater. You're not going to allow them to smirch your father's legacy by becoming someone who's going to walk around with revenge and hatred. So there was a part of me that was talking to the other part of me.
Yes.
You know, and that's what I mean by holding the space. You have to hold that space where this conversation within yourself can take place without you escaping, running away, avoiding, negating, you know, and all of that. And then ultimately you come to a place where you accept it. It's life.
Exactly.
You know.
And I think sometimes we get caught up with, in our family, the piece of the person that is hating or what have you, you know. We're reacting to something that's bad, and we then assume that we're bad, and that walks us right into a place of shame. And that gets us right back to the message we want to encourage, but you are not your circumstances. You're separate, you're strong, you're wholesome, you're worthy. You just have to get in touch with that piece of you.
Right.
And there is balance. But as you said, you went through therapy, and so you had assistance in this. And there's an outcome to your journey that I think you made a gift of your passion to other people. Can you just talk a little bit about what you've done? I know there's foundations, there's this, there's that, there's radio shows, there's...
Yeah. Well, ultimately when, you know, I came out of my hole.
Yes.
The place where I was for a very long time. For a very long time. I was in that place where, as I said, you know, I had a full life. I worked, I had friends, I went out, but that was my external
Say that
life.
again. Say that again, because this is what I think we fail to realize. We can be totally successful and miserable.
Exactly.
We can function. I mean, this is how good we are at what we do. And when we take the mask off, when we shut the door, when we fall to our knees in tears, it's no longer showtime. Now it's your time.
Right.
And,
exactly.
And the mirror is looking at you, and you're seeing what you're going through, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in my case, for instance, I worked as a consultant, so I would travel and do my work and everything. And then when I finish a certain consulting assignment,
Mm-hmm.
I always took time out. I take a vacation.
Good.
And in that vacation, that's the time I can allow myself to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fall apart as in don't even get out of bed, fall apart.
Schedule breakdowns. I like this.
Yeah, schedule breakdowns, exactly.
Okay.
I
Works for
allowed
me.
it. I allowed
I
it.
had one of those days yesterday.
but you know, and so it took a very long time, but in those years I learned a lot because I did a lot of reading. I had to be very proactive in my own healing because, like I said, there was a part of me that was determined not to be defeated.
There you go.
There was a part of me that said no.
One of those people inside the family.
Yeah, she stood up and she said no.
Uh-huh.
They're not going to destroy my life.
Good.
They're not going to destroy Dad's legacy. They're not going to take away what he had built and what he had invested in me. And he had invested a great deal in me,
Okay.
in our relationship and the things that he taught me. And a lot of the things that I use to this day about survival. So that part of me stood out and said, you have to be proactive about your healing. You can't just depend on a therapist. And ultimately, I even stopped therapy. But I continued with my own healing process. And what did I do for that? I listened to myself. I let my heart lead. And so here's where God stepped in. And he led me to music. So I started singing in the choir. That came later, actually. Before that, first came the art. Then came journaling.
That's a good thing.
I write every single day a minimum of 10 pages. So I have thousands and thousands of pages.
I have to put a comma there and tell you something funny. I
Okay.
moved back here 2 years ago, and I journal as well, right? And I threw away, I know, a good 50 journals because I was reviewing, and I thought, should tomorrow be my last day here? There's some stuff these people don't need to know, okay? So I just put those away. But 10 pages, now that,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, The Artist's Way, if you've read that book, The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron is the name of the author for those listeners who might be interested to look it up. She is a therapist who worked with many, many people in the performing arts in Hollywood. And ultimately, she wrote this book because she found out that writing a minimum of 5 to 10 pages helps a person to really access the subconscious and ultimately even the unconscious, to be able to bring up a lot of things that we're not aware of, to open up our creativity, to open up our lives and so on. And so I had read that book back in the...
So when are you publishing your 10,000 pages? I think you're going to have to break it down because people have the attention span of a gnat.
Exactly. But, well, I'm planning to do a book for next year, but it's going to be a very, very small book, not 10,000 pages. But, so yeah, journaling was one thing I was doing. And then after the journaling came yoga. Then I started doing yoga and love to walk, always have. So walking was a very big part of my life. I could see the change in my mood when I walk. And one of the wonderful things about living in New York City was if at 11 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning I couldn't sleep and I was agitated, I just got up and went for a walk. And I would go for an hour and a half or 2-hour walk and come home feeling really, really relaxed and very calm, and I would go back to sleep, So later on, I found out all these things are actually recommended for healing trauma.
There you go.
It was just that God was guiding me, really. Something in me was saying, do this, and I was listening, and I was just following it. And it resulted in my healing and my being able to actually walk out of that place.
So once you walked out of it, Did you make any deposits any other place? Did you give back in a way that you want to share?
Yeah, precisely. That's when I walked out, I said, and as I had told you earlier when I wrote that piece in 87,
Mm-hmm.
I had really wanted to do something, to turn my tragedy and my pain into something positive. And there's a piece I have written, another one, called Be Still. And in there I talk about being able to have something as a gift that I could give back.
Yes.
And so ultimately what I decided was I wanted to connect the dots for people,
Mm-hmm.
because it took me so many years to connect the dots for myself in order to be able to walk out of this place of being traumatized. And I thought, what if I was able to connect the dots for people? Could I help them to see things faster?
Mm-hmm.
Could it maybe make them feel like it's not so scary? Because I think that's what happens when you have these conflicting thoughts, when you're at war within yourself, when you're not in control of your emotions, you get really frightened. You feel like you're losing your mind, and you get really frightened. And I wanted people to know there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yes.
There is absolutely nothing to be afraid of, because being afraid itself is what leads to the anxiety. What we're afraid of is being afraid.
So what did you do? What did you give them?
So I put together a workshop called Trauma Awareness and Support Through the Arts. And the reason I use the arts is because it's, as I demonstrated in my own life, yoga,
Mm-hmm.
Singing in the choir, drawing, writing, all these, and drumming, and many, many different things, movement. All these things actually reset the brain and help, to get out of that toxic trauma energy
Yes.
that is embedded in our muscles and in parts of our bodies. So it kind of helps us to move forward and to be able to hold that space that I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So I put together this workshop, and then I thought, okay, how am I going to deliver this workshop?
Mm-hmm.
And the workshop is really for lay people, for people who don't go reading psychology books, for people who don't go, looking for blogs on psychology or on neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled together that kind of information and put together in very short format 3 modules. And these modules are on perception,
Mm-hmm.
on perspective, and on process.
Okay.
And these are, through these 3 modules, a person could actually be able to see themselves inwards. And especially for people who never spend time looking inward, this is a very good tool, a guided tool
Mm-hmm.
that will help them to go inward and look what's there, what is, how they feel, how they process. And it kind of leads them through. And in the exercises are also these arts, Tai Chi, yoga, drumming, movement, drawing, writing. So what I started, and of course, as I said, the workshop, being able to deliver the workshop, I thought, well, I have to form a nonprofit organization in order to be able to find the financing so that I could take this on the road to communities that cannot afford to pay for it. That is the target, are people who cannot afford to pay for it.
Now that's the blessing, because even Darlene could be a part of your workshop.
Exactly.
That's a critical sweet spot that we often overlook when we're trying to give back.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
It's an uphill, but the Lord is there. I trust Him completely, and I know that this is His doing, that He got me this far, because I really may not have ended up here, honestly speaking, from where I was. There was a time when I thought I have nothing to offer. There was a time when I told my therapist, I have nothing to offer. I mean, she said, if only you could see you the way I see you. you know.
That's a hallelujah moment for me. I haven't been in your space, but I have been in a space when I could not identify value in me, and I took mine a little bit further than talk. I just thought, well, I'll just end this. For me, being able to say that publicly and to sit here, like you say, we sit here today. Often when we meet people, we have no idea of their journey.
Right.
And some of the young women I mentioned, oh, Miss Tyra, I want to be just like you. And I said, sweetheart, you are wonderful just as you are. And I wouldn't want you to have my journey for the life of me. I want you to be, I said, inside of you, oh my goodness, there's something gorgeous growing. Hang on to that.
Right.
But I think there are times when life just turns us to a place where we're going, I'm not worthy. Guess what? That's a lie. Everybody, it's a lie. You are worthy.
Absolutely.
And I believe because what you're doing and what you want to deposit is so special, it's inspired, and I believe it will be actualized to a greater extent. In abundance. How's
Thank
that?
you.
In
Yes,
abundance.
Thank you.
Yes,
I believe
yes,
it. I
yes.
believe it. It's already, I started in 2016 and already I've come very, very far, really, even in 1 year. So many people have joined forces with me.
There you go.
Many different organizations. And it's amazing, even when I take flyers to, different stores to say to them, I do a radio show. It's called Trauma Awareness and Support Through the Arts. People's faces light up.
Yeah.
They are like, oh, they're interested.
Yes.
They instantly want to know more and want to share the news so that other people can listen.
I think that the appeal of that is, for me, the way you're approaching it is something everyone can grab hold of and not feel less than. When you talk about the arts, to me, the arts are unifying. All right, they're not going to set you apart. Now, look, you need to go over here and see this shrink. No, come to us and let's dance through it.
Exactly.
Let's drum through it. Let's draw through it. Let's sing through it. And I remember when I was in graduate school, someone said to me, do you know the greatest treatment for depression is a healthy, wholesome conversation? And if we could make that a part of who we are, just naturally, we might be able to avoid a lot of pain. So now I'm hearing you say you're on a journey, but you slipped in something there that you need to tell people about. You said you had a radio show. Would you like to tell people about that quickly?
Yeah, of course. The radio show is called TASTA, Trauma Awareness and Support Through the Arts. That's the acronym, is TASTA. So it's TASTA Talk Radio here at Fairfax Radio. It's on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. every week. And I interview practitioners, psychotherapists. I discuss a lot about neuroscience and manifestations of trauma, how to heal it. And there are a lot of golden nuggets in each program that people can take away for their own self-healing.
I am going to do due diligence and do a short break now. We'll be right back. I want us to share something that I ask all my guests to do, and that is, based on your experience and your growth, to read a letter you may have written to your younger self based on who you are today. Would you do that now for me?
Sure, Tyra. Okay, here it goes. Dear younger me, I want you to know that I am no longer separated from you. Now we no longer have conflicts of interest, no more bitter fights of any kind. You are the custodian of all my memories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You are the steadfast friend who always pushed me to the truth, even when it tasted bitter and vile. And still, you would speak to me with a tender voice, telling me not to hate, not to seek retribution. You urged me to go to the cross, where I could learn from Christ, the human and the God. You opted to stand firm on your principles, challenged me to dig deeper until I found love and turned toward compassion. You told me to face my fears, and you sat with me, through my darkest hours until I was able to open up and accept failure and disappointment, betrayal and persecution, sorrow and loss of love and of loved ones. I have called you a hopeless romantic, a cockeyed optimist, at times even a stupid fool. It was me who had been missing the point. I looked only at the surface. I wanted to remain with my illusions. I was afraid of being without my personal pride, my ornamented cape. You were the wiser and opted to learn how to obey the command from Jesus. Love your enemies, he said. Don't worry about what you will eat, what you will wear, or how you will live, he said. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid, he said. You reduced all my obsessions, petty desires, and endless wants that had me going in circles. You advised me to leave everything behind, take up my cross and follow him, the Alpha and the Omega. You gave me a single point of focus, God, who is the author of love, who led me to Jesus, who shows up each day and each moment, oftentimes as human.
I can't tell you what this time together has meant to me. I think personally that we have together filled the doggy bag I keep talking about. I think we have encouraged, empowered, and loved up on some folk out there in listening land. I'm going to commit. Hannah's coming back, okay? I'm going to have Mr. Tony Walker take us out with our theme song, and I want you all to be blessed, be loved, know you're worthy, and you're not your circumstance.
Thank you, Tyra. Thank you for the opportunity.